Hello, greetings, Danielle.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good. It's fun to be here again for our third round of fertility
Yes.
talks.
Yeah, we are. That's right. Third round, which means chapter three of the natural fertility book. And let me just remind myself, I'll put that up. Anyone who does not yet have the book, you can always download it for free right here at this website, naturalfertilitybook.com. And just take that off for now. Maybe I'll put it on afterwards. But yeah, let me bring up our special little slideshow. And Danielle, just let you kind of walk us through what this is all about today.
Sure. Yeah. So, just as a little preamble before, we've had more of a macro perspective of things to do for fertility and health. And today we're just going to get into some of the specifics in terms of our diet. So, we've been talking about mineral and nutrient density, which has been our focus. And today we're going to talk about specific tried and true methods of eating. And as you wrote in your book, what we're going to be talking about aren't fad diets, but they're principles to use in the kitchen that really promote reproductive health.
Hmm.
And it's just good to remember that none of the things we're going to be talking about today are a quick fix. So it took a long period of time, maybe your whole life of eating a certain way to create a specific condition, and it might not change overnight. Um, and I just like to preface this conversation with, humans have evolved from 2.5 million years ago. We've been hunters and gatherers for around 77,000 generations. The agricultural revolution only happened 350 generations ago. And the industrial revolution that brought us, like white flour and sugar, happened only 7 generations ago. And then the modern food industry that brought us Eggo waffles and Pop Tarts and the
Hmm.
like, hamburger helper, that's really just 2 generations old. And so, what we're going to be going over here are the things that really evolved with us as humans and what our biology and physiology really need to thrive.
Hmm. I'm just thinking about how wild the family reunion would be with all 77,000 generations.
Yes, you would have all types in there in that
Oh yeah,
room.
yeah, very much so. Yeah. Okay,
Um,
so I forget. Do you have click control over the slides? I could do
oh,
it, but
you actually
okay,
have control. Yeah, I
okay.
don't. Um, So, yeah, we're just starting here with what we've already talked about loosely, but we want to eat fresh and organic, and that's not just for the nutrient density and superior soil quality, but it reduces our exposure to pesticides and other chemicals. Um, and not just that, but we really want to focus on getting our nutrition from whole foods. So it's always best to meet our nutrient needs through foods. And that is how we've been adapted to absorb all the things that we need from them. And so this rings true not just when we're talking about food, but also when we're considering supplementation. So isolated and synthetic nutrients, they don't have the same effect on our body, and many nutrients require the cofactors and the things that are naturally built into the food with it and enzymes to be properly absorbed and activated. And then when it comes to fruits and veggies, we want to make sure, of course, to include them in our diet. And I eat a lot of fresh seasonal fruit and mostly cooked veggies. And this also translates into our pH, which we discussed in our first chapter talk. So you can always go back and refer to that and how our pH affects our body. But it's an important factor in our fertility.
Hmm. Okay. And I just wanted to, as you were talking, I was thinking, I want to make a quick point on this idea of whole foods. I think this is generally known, but it's worth repeating that, nowadays, speaking of, those products you mentioned that are only 2 generations old, we think we're so clever, right? We can go in to a natural whole food and just extract what we think are the good things. So let's grab this enzyme, chemically, or let's grab this or that nutrient or whatever, and package that up, and then everyone will get the benefit of that. But no, there's such a deep wisdom both in our bodies and in nature as far as what's in those whole foods and how we relate to them. All the just the whole complex of everything is just a whole different world than our, say, our very clever scientific approach to nutrition.
Yeah, that's exactly it. When we try to isolate the quote good part of the food, really it's not in alignment with the synergistic effects of having the whole building blocks that will allow us to really use it. And so when we have a synthetic portion, as a vitamin or nutrient cofactor that we take and supplement, our body not only isn't able to absorb it, but then it has to leach from our internal storage the things that it needs to even metabolize it. And so it's really it could be hurting us more than helping us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Yeah, what's that phrase? Unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
And more on just our general principles. We do want to use traditional preparation methods for cooking, preserving, storing our foods. And so this is just bringing a consideration of what our foods need to be the most nourishing they can be to our body. So how we maximize absorption and minimize the negative effects of certain foods. And we'll get into that a little more, but a lot of things like grains and lentils, and they have anti-nutrients. So we want to make sure that we're responding and preparing them in a way that will allow them to be food for our body. And then further, we want to avoid fake foods. So this is all the additives and preservatives, colors, flavor enhancers, et cetera, et cetera. So we want to nourish our body with foods that promote fertility, and then avoid the food toxins that we know cause infertility and health problems, which is a lot of our current food.
Mm-hmm. So readily available, but so should be avoided, basically.
Yeah, and you mentioned in your book a good frame of reference would just be to ask yourself, what did grandma eat? She didn't have access to a lot of the modern foods that we have, the processed foods. So it's just fun to remember the recipes and the manner of eating that is in our bones and in our lineage. And so just asking yourself, did my grandma eat this? It's just to kind of cue you on things that could be really nourishing for our body and avoiding those that aren't. And another principle that we always like to emphasize is getting to know your farmers. And so head down to the farmers market. And this not only facilitates a relationship with farmers, and then just generally slowing down, which I think we can all really use in our life, but it allows you to learn the relationship of growing food and develop a relationship with the earth and recognize how alive our food is. And because our food can contain various quantities of light or information. And so when we're learning the methods that the farmers are using, we can really see just how dynamic and alive our food is. And that's the ones that we really want to target.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so when we're going to the grocery store, a good thing to remember is that the real food is in the perimeter. So this is all the fruits and vegetables and dairy products and meats. And then in the middle of the store is all the packaged goods. So that's just good to remember, even to recognize when you go inside the grocery store and you can really see like, oh, this is all the fake food and this is the real food. So keep to your arrows.
They could label the aisles with fake food, that would be easier, but they just usually say whatever, cereals, grains, this and that and the other. Yeah.
Yes, I don't think the food companies would appreciate that label. And then we also want to have consideration for our personal care products. There's so many products that it's easy to forget, but they influence our exposure to toxins. So it's not just what we're, eating and putting in our mouth. It's also all the things that our skin organ is getting put on it. So this includes, cosmetics and hair dyes and skincare, cleaning supplies, right down to scented candles. We want to be aware of any dental care that we're using and what's in those, because of course that can have a strong influence. Dryer sheets. So all of these, fake scents are hormone disruptors, they're endocrine disruptors, they have estrogenic effects. And there's even some science out now that it could be associated with the increase of gender dysphoria that we're seeing, which is kind of another topic. But yeah, our skin acts as a barrier and protective layer, but then it also regulates and is very important for absorbing. So anything that you put on it, you're putting in your body.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, that's a good point, because normally we just think of what do we eat? I have a clean diet, or that kind of thing. But yeah, you're right. The skin is an amazing absorbing organ.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's all going in, and
Yeah.
including, of course, we get into air pollution and whatnot. But more bringing it home, as you're saying, is all the cleaning products and everything, all that kind of thing.
Yeah. And a lot of time when we talk about we emphasize food, but really the stress that we have in our daily life. And this isn't just emotional stress, it's also the stress of the exposures that we're putting on ourselves. And so it's really important to note that this is just as important, and it's easily overlooked because we do have such an emphasis on food typically. And so those like these physical qualities of stress of the exposures are really important to try to reduce for fertility, so that we can just give the cue to our body, like you're safe, you're healthy, you're in a healthy environment, so that your body knows that it's okay to have a baby.
Exactly.
And then further, we want to consider our bio individuality. So we're all unique. We all have unique needs in terms of our evolution and where our family's from, where our history's from. And then we talked in our past discussions, this is where it's important to start incorporating mindfulness. And so you can begin to identify the distinction between, oh, I'm craving this or I'm desiring this. So your body will yearn for the foods that are nourishing it, but that can be hard to have a distinction from the cravings. Oh, I want that chocolate bar, I want that sugar. And so mindful eating can really allow you to tap into your body and develop a relationship with yourself and get to know what you need, and then nourish yourself according to your desires.
So are you saying we need to mindfully eat the chocolate bar?
Yeah, exactly. Just as long as you're sitting on your meditation cushion, it's fine to eat the chocolate bar.
Right. Yeah, obviously I'm being tongue in cheek, but yeah, it is. I'm pointing to this is kind of a broader topic, but yeah, some of the mind games we can get into around telling ourselves things are okay. Of course, it's the whole inner voice of addiction, and that whole topic. But yeah, it's kind of a humorous topic at one end, but very serious at the other. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just as a side note, in terms of addictions, there are other factors, underlying factors that can be related to like what we're craving and why we're craving, and we get into that more when we do individualized treatment through Arcanum.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. The principles are universal, but yeah, everyone is an individual, and we need to address them as such. So.
Yeah. And then finally, we mentioned on the slide here, Dr. Weston Price. We really recommend looking into his research. And so he was a dentist that traveled the world and observed traditional cultures because he wanted to understand the relationship between nutrition and dental health. And he discovered that where the diets might be unique according to geographic locations, they all had some underlying principles. So they're based on nutrient density and obviously no modern processed foods. But then what was so fascinating was these cultures, they didn't have any evidence of deficiency or disease. And so not only were these cultures, did they have superior dental health, they had superior health in general, and this included reproductive health. So there were certain physical characteristics that he noted. So people that consumed a traditional diet, they had wider jaws. All their teeth could fit in their mouth, so they didn't have to extract their wisdom teeth. And there were open nasal cavities, so people could breathe effectively. They had a wide, strong jaw. They had wide hips. So this, of course, is relevant for birthing. And then you can compare that to what we're seeing that is common nowadays, which is that everyone has narrow faces. It's really, normal to have braces. Poor eyesight is increasing in prevalence, learning disabilities, there's a mental health crisis. So this can all be related to our diet, nutrition.
And it's quite dramatic if you pick up Dr. Price's book, just to look at the photographs, of all the, these kind of natural living people, original forms of living, just all their big, their broad smiles and happy faces, and all the features you're talking about. But yeah, the photographs. What was that expression? A picture's worth 1,000 words. You really get that in the Dr. Price book.
Yeah, and what was so interesting is that he was doing this research right on the cusp of when some modern or American diets are being introduced to more like traditional regions, and so you could see within the family, an older brother having this beautiful wide jaw, and then a younger sibling that was exposed to, like modern seed oils and sugars and white flours, and there'd be crooked teeth and narrower like nose passages and narrower jaws. And so it became really, really clear what was happening.
Yes.
And it was all recorded in images. So yeah, exactly. I really recommend that.
It's a fascinating moment of history, that what he was doing then, as you just said, it was the beginning of, industrialized foods, in the Western world. But it was also, like, technologically, it was when, air travel first became possible. And also it was about the beginning of when cameras existed, right? So all these kind of three historical moments converged to make possible Dr. Price's research, which is absolutely invaluable to us now. But yeah, there you have it.
Yeah, and we're going to get a little more into some of the principles of the Weston Price diet in the upcoming slides.
Yes.
Oh yeah, so here's one of those images you can see on the top. You notice the wide mouth, healthy smiles, and then on the bottom, just a narrower face. You can see crooked teeth. So in essence, the Weston A. Price diet is a traditional diet, so it's similar to paleo. And so what he recommended, though, it's often in contrast to many of the current modern diets that are recommended, like veganism, vegetarianism. It completely opposes the cholesterol myth. And so there can be some controversy around him, and a lot of people dismiss his work. But I think a lot of it is because of our modern avoidance of organ meats. Many of the fundamental building blocks of our nutrition, like vitamin A, vitamin K2, it causes an underdevelopment of, the face, jaw, sinuses, causes poor tooth development, mouth breathing, susceptibility to cavities, all the things that we've already talked about. And then just lastly here, I wanted to note, scientism versus science. So he lived in a time where there was still a focus on real science. So I would say scientism right now, you hear all these cliche mottos of trust the science, but really scientism is an ideology that takes center stage rather than using the scientific method based on true inquiry. Yeah. So part of the reason why there's so much confusion about what we're supposed to be eating is because there's cherry-picked data, and it's often used to support whoever is funding the study, or whatever ideological, politically correct thing is appropriate. So yeah, it's fun to go back to a time where science really was the focus. And that's why a lot of really good research is actually done around the time of Weston Price.
Yes. What's that thing you'll see put out on social media occasionally? Someone will say, what is it? Something like scientists agree with whoever it is that's funding them?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, animal protein.
Yeah, animal protein. This is a topic I'm really passionate about, and it can be hard to hear when a person is invested in not eating animals. And of course, there might be some individual differences in terms of, spiritually how a person is orienting their health. But especially if we're talking about infertility, it's important to emphasize animal protein, because there was a lot of variety in traditional diets. Some people didn't eat plants, some people had limited dairy, but everyone ate some animal protein. That was consistent across the board. And animal protein is the most bioavailable. And of course, we want to consider the source. And so in a modern context, the healthier the animal, the healthier the final product. And so we really want to make sure we're looking at, is it pasture fed? Is it pastured? Is it grain fed? And we also want to eat nose to tail. So this includes all of the internal organs. I always say that liver is nature's multivitamin. And so I want to include that in a fertility diet. And then after, when you get pregnant too, but it, is high in all the vitamins, the fat soluble vitamins, vitamin A and D, which are essential for fertility. And then there's also, things like bone broth, which is incredibly nourishing, high in, because a lot of people are eating the lean meats these days, like the muscle meats. And so we want to balance the amino acid profile with things like bone broths. And then wild caught fish is another excellent source of animal protein. And I know there's some discussion about mercury levels in fish, but as long as the fish that you're eating has more selenium than mercury, it binds to the metal and it makes it safe for consumption. So I think the benefit of eating fish still outweighs the possible risks. And so we're talking about, like salmon, mackerel, cod, things like that, anchovies, sardines.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and healthy fats. So if you come away with one thing, this could be it, which is low fat is low fertility. So this kind of speaks to some of the cholesterol myth, but hormones are constructed with fats, and we've been eating a high-fat diet for most of those 77,000 generations. And so this means that we have evolved to eat fat. Our biology is optimized for this type of fat. So saturated fat is the core structural part of every cell. It's the preferred fuel for mitochondria. The human body stores energy from food for future use as saturated fat. So we really want to make sure that we're not afraid of animal fats. The cholesterol myth, it totally lacks nuance, and it completely demonizes cholesterol. But it was essentially, you go over this in the book, was started by the statin drug industry. So we want to develop a wider lens of what is fat, how does our body use it, why is it important, and so we can have a more cohesive understanding of that fat is not our energy, and it's a very important component in fertility diet. So lean protein has almost no fat in it, which we talked about earlier. And so when you eat lean protein only, the body will actually pull our stored fat-soluble vitamins from the liver to assimilate the protein. So we want to make sure that we're eating animal fats. And then it also says use traditional oils. So we're talking about things like olive oils, topical coconut palm kernel oil. We want to supplement with cod liver oil. And then again, we just want to make sure we know where it's being sourced from and how the company is processing the cod liver oil, because typically, depending on how it's made, the fats can be oxidized, and they actually extract the vitamins out and then add synthetic vitamins. So just to have some awareness of the company that's making it and how it's made. But I think a good quality cod liver oil is really important, especially for people on the northern hemispheres. Like I'm from Canada, so I use it all year round. And then with an emphasis on traditional oils, we're also talking about avoiding industrial seed oils.
Yes.
So these are totally ubiquitous in our life. But I think just developing an awareness of how much you're eating. So this does mean that we're going to be reading the labels. But industrial seed oils are really high in omega-6, which promotes inflammation, infertility, virtually all modern diseases. And so, PUFAs are in no way conducive to health and fertility. So I think that when it comes to them, it is important to read the labels and start reducing how much we're taking.
You're reminding me of the bad oils earlier this week. This is literally the words I said to a patient. I said, I want you to go to your fridge right now and take out the margarine, throw it away, throw it in the trash, and promise me you will never buy it again.
Yes, absolutely. No one should be eating margarine at this point. There's just too much information, and butter's delicious. Exactly. Eat the butter, eat all the butter. Yeah. I remember when I was in my early 20s and I was going through a stage of, low fat vegetarian. And for some reason, my body just compelled me to go into the fridge at the grocery store and get a full thing of butter. And then when I walked out the door, I just ate the butter straight up. And I guess that desire was so strong, it was leading me to the right path. It's like, no, you need this fat. And then my brain lit up right away. It was sort of like it could take a breath finally.
Yes. Yeah. And when you just said that about taking a breath, it's so interesting. It's like the whole, like, we need nutrition for all, all the reasons we're talking about, but yeah, you see that as well in somebody's state of mind, right? When they're getting the nutrition they need, they feel better to themselves, mentally, emotionally, they're calmer, like, like a lot of anxiety, of course there's many other causes, but yeah, can come from a dietary deficiency, right?
Absolutely.
Especially including fats, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so now don't blame us, but if you go to the grocery store and you're eating the butter right there in the dairy aisle, just tell them you have some kind of genetic condition or something.
I need it right now.
Right.
Yeah, so now we're going to get into dairy. And we're talking about full fat milk and cream. And this, when I was making up these slides, it actually reminded me of a study out of Harvard that I had read about that described women who ate 2 or more servings of low-fat dairy per day. So we're talking about skim or low-fat milk or yogurt. It increased the risk of fertility by 85%. So this is really significant. And so, of course, the authors advised women wanting to conceive should be consuming high-fat dairy foods and whole milk and full-fat yogurts. And so if you are going to be consuming dairy, I really recommend trying to find a raw dairy source. And I know this can be hard, especially in Canada where it's illegal. But this could encourage you to go visit your farmers, because people who can tolerate dairy, it's just so nutrient dense, and the raw dairy includes enzymes that help with digestion, and it hasn't been denatured through pasteurization and the homogenization process. So I think it's just a really bulletproof food. And then, it's also, we want to consider the source of dairy, especially in places like America, because they've approved bovine growth hormones. And so there's hormones, antibiotics, just the health of the animal is reflected in the milk quality. And so you don't want to be consuming all those things.
Yeah.
And then lastly, fermented dairy is really great. So yogurts, kefir. And again, say yes to butter.
Yes. Yeah, yes, with an exclamation mark. Yeah.
Yes. So fruits and vegetables, again, organic as much as possible for the nutrient density. And you go into the book about a backyard garden, and this can be such a fun way to include fresh fruit and also incorporate, your family into your gardening. It connects you to the growing process, and getting your fingers in the ground is incredibly fulfilling. And then starting to encourage our kids to have that relationship and see where our food comes from. And you're not going to get any fresher than your backyard garden. So that's always a fun way to always get more vegetables and fresh vegetables in. And then we do want to ferment our veggies. So in essence, fermentation pre-digests your food, and it maximizes nutrients, incorporates the kinds of probiotics that our bodies have evolved for. And fresh fruits, juices, vegetable juices, fruit juices, it's a good way to get a quick influx of nutrition. Has lots of vitamins and phytonutrients. I always just want to say too, though, if we're going to be consuming a high amount of sugars in that form, just to make sure you're balancing it with the meal so that you don't get a huge spike in blood sugar.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So eat some fat with your veggies. And then, here we're getting into grains and nuts and seeds. And so, as we already referred to at the beginning, preparation is important. Grains and seeds and nuts can be full of anti-nutrients. And so this can be reduced by sprouting and soaking and using sourdough recipes. So soaking involves putting the grains and flours into an acidic medium at warm temperatures, which activates an enzyme called phytase and eliminates the phytic acid. So that means that when you eat it, it won't leach more nutrients from you than it gives you.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
So all traditional cultures would take a lot of time to prepare these types of foods. in ways that were supportive to the body. So it was very rare to see people just eating nuts or, eating grains, but there was always certain methods that were used within a cultural context in terms of preparation.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just make a quick point on that. Like, a lot of people talk about having problems with sensitivity to wheat or gluten specifically, but yet, often if they if they have the soaked version of those grains, the totally different preparation method, they actually have no problem with it. So it just illustrates this anti-nutrition problem that we're largely dealing with.
Yeah. And then just another note that, if I'm going to have organic of anything, I really make sure to do it with grains, because glyphosate and different pesticides are just so high on this category of food. And that has been shown to lead to a lot of dysfunction in the body and infertility. And so we want to make sure that there's no glyphosate residue on our foods. And so specifically for grains and lentils and, nuts and seeds, just try to find an organic source.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And yeah, so people have queried whether people's intolerance for gluten is actually an intolerance for glyphosate.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's right. That's right. Yeah, a lot points to that for sure.
Okay, so now we're
Sweeteners.
getting into sweeteners. So we want to use natural sweeteners. So of course, these are things like honey, maple syrup, and to avoid refined sugar. So this includes high fructose corn syrup, white sugar. So our body just hasn't been adapted to have that like high influx of glucose or fructose. And we want to avoid artificial sweeteners. So these are things like aspartame, Splenda, xylitol, sorbitol. So, sugar has been really demonized, but I think that's because the way that we're consuming it and the amount that we're consuming it and the kind that we're consuming, all of that matters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And soy gets a whole category to itself because, the first bullet point there, avoid.
Right.
So there's many negative health associations with soy, and soy is hidden in everything these days. So like we've already talked about, it's an anti-nutrient, it's a hormone disruptor, phytoestrogen, it limits oxygen into your cells. And then for those looking to do a deep dive, you reference in the book the whole soy story by Dr. Kayla Daniel. And she goes into a lot of the negative health effects of soy: malnutrition, digestive issues, thyroid issues, immune system issues, heart disease, cancers. Really, you could just go on and on and on with all the things that soy causes. And it's relevant here because it's connected to reproductive disorders as well as impaired fertility. So we really want to make sure to reduce it as much as possible. But there's some traditionally fermented soy that's okay. So this would include, as it says here, miso, tempeh, soy sauce, tamari.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And folate. So yes, this is an essential nutrient for a growing baby. And folate is probably the vitamin that most pregnant women know is essential. You always hear like, I want to make sure I'm getting my folic acid in. It's necessary for production of DNA, cell division. So pregnancy really requires a lot of folate. I just wanted to make the distinction between folate and folic acid because they're not the same. Folic acid is a chemical that isn't normally found in foods that we eat. And folic acid doesn't cross the placenta like natural folate does. And so a lot of our prenatal multivitamins actually have folic acid, which can cause more harm than help. And so, I think it's important to focus on it, but focus on food sources. And then another consideration is that folate absorption is highly dependent on our zinc status, and zinc deficiency is really common in vegans and vegetarians. And so again, all of these specific vitamins and nutrients, they work together cohesively. So that's why we want to have an emphasis on food as much as possible. With the incorporation of animal proteins and animal foods. And so some foods that are high in folate include dark leafy greens and citrus fruits, avocados, some lentils. Yeah, we just want to make sure for the lentils that we try to prepare them correctly.
Yep. And yeah, of course, that also gets back to the topic of soaking.
Yeah.
Okay, and here is our zinc.
Yes. Yeah, zinc is another one that you wrote about in the book. And it was fun because you get into the zinc tally test, which is a liquid supplement and it allows you to taste for your own deficiency. So it's a really easy way to determine your zinc levels. So if your dose tastes like nothing, then you're deficient. But
Yes.
if you take take the supplement and then you want to spit it out right away, then that means you have enough zinc. And then the slide here lists some foods that are high in zinc. So we can see calf liver, oysters, beef, lamb, venison, sesame, pumpkin, yogurt, turkey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like this picture. It's a beautiful photograph.
I love oysters.
Yeah.
Yes, and next we're going to talk about iodine, which is also really important for fertility. So iodine is associated with thyroid health because iodine makes up part of our thyroid hormones. Our thyroid is a master regulator in our body, so it affects ovulation, it affects sperm count. So it is an important nutrient that we want to make sure we're getting. And iodine is a huge risk factor for negative pregnancy outcomes too. So not just for fertility, but then also for the health of the pregnancy. And then you see some food sources here: sea vegetables, real sea salt, saltwater fish, dairy, eggs, navy beans. And then, like we just talked about for the zinc, there's just an at-home test you can do to determine your levels of iodine. So you can get a bottle of iodine or potassium iodine from the first aid section of the store, and then you rub a little bit on your skin, a little patch, a little square, and it should stay on for at least 24 hours. And so how fast your body is absorbing it shows how much it needs. And so if it's absorbed really quickly, then you know you're likely deficient.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so I guess that wraps up that chapter. So we will be here for at least a couple of minutes or more. If you're watching us live, you can just put your question into the comment box, or otherwise, if you're watching this as a replay, same thing. We'll get the comments and we'll incorporate them into a future talk. So yeah, let's say we'll leave this channel open for at least a couple of minutes if anyone is busy typing their question. And I know also there's something like a 30-second delay from when we talk to when it's out in the world. So this is like beaming a message out into space to try to communicate with aliens. We have that delay time. But as I say, we'll leave this channel open. But otherwise, do you have any, Danielle, any kind of final summarizing comments or little other points that could, in between the slides or whatever?
Just what it says here, that what we're eating is one piece of the puzzle, and there's other factors that can really affect absorption and how we take in nutrients. And so we really get into those other factors when we work with our patients. So like, what about our body is causing it to not be able to take in health? So it's a lot to address, so we're not going to get into it, but it's also an exciting part of a fertility treatment plan.
That's it. Yeah, because as I said earlier, the principles are universal, but last I figured, everyone is a very unique individual. So we're really custom fitting the principles to what's going on with that person. Okay, so I don't see any comments coming through, but again, as I say, if you're watching this as a replay, we will get your comments and incorporate them into our upcoming presentations. And so thank you, Danielle. This is fun as always. And, we'll see you in about another month or so when we get into chapter 4.
Sounds good, Jeff. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, we'll see you all, everyone else out in TV land, and have a good rest of your day.